Well, to talk more about Roxham Road and the deal to turn away irregular border crossers, we're now joined by two members of Parliament, Francesco Sorbera, the Liberal MP for the Ontario riding of Woodbridge-Vaughan, and Peter Julian is the NDP member for Burnaby-Westminster, also the NDP House Leader. Hello to both of you.
Good to be here.
Mr. Julian,
today, Michael.
And you. Mr. Julian, I'm going to get you to start us off because really it's your party that is expressing concern over this policy direction. Now, as you know, the Quebec government has been calling on Ottawa to close Roxham Road. So now that has happened, why your opposition?
Because the federal government hasn't put into place the provisions that are needed, and that's suspending the Safe Third Country Agreement. The reason why Roxham Road has been an artery for refugees seeking refuge in Canada is because the Safe Third Country Agreement doesn't allow them to move through any regular border crossings. And this is really what's required. We're talking about tens of thousands of people that are fleeing persecution. Jenny Kwan today in the House of Commons raised the issue of Sidju Mohammed. He is a gay man who would have been killed in his own country, was refused refuge in the United States and came to Canada. And he almost died making that crossing. He made it to Canada. And of course, ultimately his refugee claim was completely valid and he was accepted in Canada. But we're not allowing, the Trudeau government is not allowing for the regular border crossings that will allow people to apply for the status of refugee. And so closing Roxham Road basically doesn't allow for the kind of provision that is so important. That these refugees are fleeing, in many cases, certain death and hardship and possible torture and violations of human rights. The least we can do is provide for them to come regularly to Canada.
Well, Mr. Sorbera, the criticism has been that now that this deal has been struck, it will only force those migrants, those people who are trying to get into Canada to seek refuge, to essentially seek out more dangerous ways to get here in the dead of night, more remote areas, harder areas to cross. Are you not worried about a potential loss of life as a result of this policy direction?
Oh, Michael, thank you for that question. Look, the United States and Canada have a shared responsibility when it comes to migration and migration of individuals. And on that respect, what we've done is we've come to an agreement with the United States, expanded the Safe Third Party Country Agreement to allow and to encourage regular migration. Excuse me, I'm going to take my glasses off. One of my eyes is disturbing me a second. And with that, what we want to see is regular migration occur coming to Canada. And we know, excuse me for a second, and we know with the agreement, what we will put in place is a program which will allow 15,000 individuals from the impacted area, Central America, South America, to find regular migration to Canada. What we don't want to encourage is irregular migration. And Mr. Julian knows that. And the same provisions that apply for when people seek asylum at regular border crossings, those exemptions, unaccompanied minors, people with family in Canada, that remains in place. What the agreement does, it standardizes and modernizes the Safe Third Party Country Agreement for basically all border crossings coming into Canada. That's the right thing to do. It's the reasonable thing to do. It's demonstrating leadership. And again, Canada and Canadians are compassionate people. We're a compassionate country. We take in more resettled refugees than any other country currently on an absolute basis. We are doing our part. And we are helping those individuals, the most vulnerable, and we'll continue to do so.
Okay, Mr. Julian, how do you respond to that then? Because the government has promised to accept 15,000 migrants as a way of addressing irregular border crossings. It's not as if they've closed Roxham Road, said people cannot cross in other parts of the country without at least providing that valve. How do you respond to that?
Well, first off, there's no information about those numbers. Secondly, though, I underscore over 40,000 people went through Roxham Road last year. So obviously the number of refugees, the vast majority of them being valid refugee claimants. So what we're doing is, even if that number had any validity, the numbers that the Liberals are putting forward, we are basically closing doors to valid refugee claimants, people who are fleeing persecution, fleeing possible violence or even death. And the reality is, Mr. Sorbera, I think, made the NDP's case very clearly when he said, we don't want to have irregular border crossings. The way to do that is to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement, as Jagmeet Singh has called for, as Jenny Kwan, our immigration critic, has called for, so that those legitimate refugee claimants can cross through regular land crossings. And this is what the Trudeau government refuses to do, the right thing, to ensure that legitimate refugees, rather than being sent back to their own country facing certain persecution or death, what they can do is go to a regular border crossing and seek asylum in Canada.
Mr. Sorbera.
Michael, I do need to correct something, because there is something that I know the NDP immigration critic mentioned and that MP Julian mentioned that is not actually correct. When an individual comes to the Canadian border, and it is through an irregular migration process, not a regular migration process, the person is returned to the United States to continue their asylum claim. The person is not, the individual is not, and I wish to repeat that, returned to their home country. The person is returned to the United States, where they will continue their asylum claim. So I do want to put that on the record, because I do not want in any way for any of our viewers to understand that the person can be returned to their home country to face persecution, to face violence, or anything to that extent. They are returned to the United States. Again, and it goes back to the point of the United States and Canada having a mature relationship where we enter negotiations, we look at the situation, we assess the situation, and we come to an agreement and collaborate together and how best to handle what really is a migration issue, which we see all over the world. And again, Canadians in Canada, we're welcoming. We want immigration to come to Canada. We want it done through a normal process, a regular migration progress, a regular immigration process. So I really want to lead to that point where they are not sent back to their home country. They're sent to they return to the United States to continue their asylum claim.
The Liberals have no control over that. With the Safe Third Country Agreement in place, they're returned to the United States. They're refused entry to Canada. And in the case of Sidhu Mohammed, he was being sent back to Ghana. And in that case, certain to face discrimination and persecution. So it's simply nonsensical for Liberals on the one hand to say no refugee is impacted. We know that they are. As long as the Safe Third Country Agreement is in place and we reject those refugees at the border, we send them back to the U.S. We are allowing U.S. immigration officials. And we've certainly seen in Texas and Florida how mean-spirited those states are in terms of asylum seekers. There is real potential that they'll be sent back to their home countries and in many cases facing persecution or even death. That's the problem. And Liberals need to admit that, because the reality is we need to have in place an ability for folks to cross a regular border crossing. And as long as the Safe Third Country Agreement forces our immigration officials to turn those people back, there is always a risk they'll be sent back and deported to their homeland.
Mr. Sorbera, I have less than a minute here, but we hear from Mr. Julian, but we've certainly heard it from a lot of immigration lawyers. I know the Canadian Bar Society has looked into this as well, as to whether or not the Safe Third Country Agreement should actually be suspended, given the fact that the United States has different standards than Canada. And here we are, a country looking for greater immigration. We've heard that from Sean Fraser, the immigration minister. We are looking at a situation where we are up against employers looking for employees and a CPP system that needs more people to fund it if we want to have retirement. Why not suspend that agreement and deal with these refugees on a case-by-case basis, as opposed to a blanket refusal for entry into this country?
Well, first of all, what I would say to that is I look to the minister's announcement today, which directly focuses on skilled refugees, providing a pathway for skilled refugees that wish to come to Canada and utilize the skills that they have here in the economy. And just like you said, we need immigrants to come to Canada. We need newcomers to Canada. And finding those pathways for those individuals to come here to not only contribute to our economy, but build a family, build a future here for them and their loved ones. And we are encouraging that. We see the number of 500,000 newcomers, which we're targeting, and providing pathways. Regularized pathways for individuals from around the world to come to Canada. And look, we were facing pressure points with Roxham Road. from the provincial governments, the number of individuals crossing. We know that we needed to act, and we acted in the manner which was very prudent, demonstrating leadership, but also demonstrating quite compassion and saying we've come to an agreement where we will now accept 15,000 migrants, 15,000 individuals
Quickly, Mr.
to come
Sorbera.
to Canada and build their future. And I think that is the prudent thing to do, and that's the right thing to do.
Okay.
There's
Well,
nothing
thank you.
compassionate about sending people back and turning them away at the border, and that's what the Liberals are doing.
Okay, that is where we end our discussion. I do want to thank both of you for joining us today. And Francesco Sorbera, thank you for even pushing through as you're having the eye issue there. So thank you very much for that, Francesco Sorbera. Thank you, Peter Julian. And just a note for everybody at home who are wondering, we did invite the Conservatives to take part in tonight's conversation.